What would you do if you lost everything but still had the will to fight? One homeless veteran's unexpected journey will leave you speechless. The bitter November wind bit through Mark's thin jacket as he sat hunched on a splintered bench near the downtown park. His boots, once polished to perfection during his time in the service, were now scuffed and torn, barely holding together against the cold pavement beneath him. People hurried past, businessmen with sleek briefcases, mothers tugging children in bright winter coats, couples lost in conversation. No one noticed the man who sat quietly, his shoulders weighed down by years of hardship. Mark's face, weathered by both war and the struggles of civilian life, bore the lines of battles seen and battles endured alone. A faint ache settled in his chest, not just from the cold, but from the emptiness that gnawed at his spirit. He clenched his trembling hands, the scars on them a permanent reminder of a time when his purpose was clear: serve, protect, and lead. But now, those days felt like a distant dream. Discharged from the military, forgotten by a society that once praised his service, and plagued by memories he couldn't shake, Mark had lost everything: his home, his family, and for a time, even his will to go on. A single dog-eared photograph tucked in his pocket was the only thing he had left. A smiling young man in uniform, full of hope and ambition. Mark barely recognized that version of himself anymore. As he sat there, shivering against the wind, a woman passing by glanced in his direction. Their eyes met for the briefest moment before she quickly looked away, her pace quickening. Mark sighed, his breath visible in the frigid air. He was used to it, the averted eyes, the judgment, the pity. But what he didn't know was that today would be different. One encounter was about to change everything, giving him a chance not just to survive, but to truly live again. Mark stood up from the bench, his stiff joints protesting with every movement. He pulled his jacket tighter around himself as the wind picked up. The day ahead was uncertain, just like every day since he lost his home 2 years ago. After returning from service, Mark struggled to adjust to civilian life. The job market was unforgiving, especially for someone with skills that didn't easily translate outside the battlefield. Bills piled up faster than he could handle, and when his small construction gig folded, the bank came knocking. With no savings left and nowhere to turn, he was forced out of the modest home he'd built with pride. Survival now meant scouring the streets for shelter and scrounging for food, a far cry from the disciplined life he'd once known. As he walked past the bustling cafe windows, warm laughter and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, a world he no longer belonged to. He tried not to linger too long, knowing that standing too close would invite judgmental glances from patrons inside. Further down the street, a community center caught his eye. A small sign near the entrance read, "Hot meals served at noon. All welcome." Mark hesitated. He hated the feeling of charity, the hollow smiles and polite pity. But hunger gnawed at his stomach, and pride couldn't fill an empty belly. He steeled himself and walked toward the building. The line was already forming, a mix of weathered faces like his own. Veterans, displaced workers, people just down on their luck, each with a story no one cared to hear. As Mark shuffled forward, a volunteer at the door handed him a tray. "Welcome, sir," she said warmly, her smile genuine. "Glad you're here today." Mark nodded politely and used a kindness that felt real. He found a seat near the corner, away from the chatter. Steam rose from the bowl of hearty stew in front of him, and for a moment, the simple warmth was enough to ease the cold inside. "Mind if I sit here?" a voice asked. Mark looked up to see a man around his age, clean-cut, but with a tiredness in his eyes that Mark recognized immediately, a fellow soldier. The man wore a veteran's jacket with a small patch indicating service overseas. "Sure," Mark said quietly. The man sat down and extended his hand. "Name's Paul. Army, 97-08. "Mark, Marines, 99-09, he replied, shaking Paul's hand firmly. They exchanged the usual pleasantries that veterans often did, where they served, how long they'd been out. but there was an unspoken understanding between them, one that didn't need words. "You staying at the shelter downtown?" Paul asked. Mark shook his head. "Just making it day by day." Paul nodded thoughtfully. "I was there too not long ago. Got some help from a program that changed things for me. They helped me find work, even a place to stay." Mark raised an eyebrow, skeptical. Programs like that always come with strings attached. "Not this one," Paul said firmly. "They're run by veterans for veterans. They get it. No judgment, just real help." He paused. "You should check it out. They meet tomorrow morning at the Civic Center." Mark wanted to dismiss the idea, but something in Paul's voice made him pause. Maybe it was the sincerity, or maybe it was the simple fact that Paul had been where he was and found a way out. "Maybe," Mark said cautiously. Paul smiled. "That's a start." The rest of the meal passed in comfortable silence, and when Mark left the center, Paul's words lingered in his mind. That night, as Mark lay under a makeshift shelter by the riverbank, the cold biting through his thin blanket, he thought about the offer. He had nothing left to lose, and maybe, just maybe, it was time to take a chance. The next morning, Mark stood outside the Civic Center, unsure whether to go in. His instincts told him to walk away, but Paul's words lingered in his mind. With a deep breath, he pushed open the doors and stepped inside. The room was filled with people, some dressed neatly, others like Mark, weathered by hardship. A banner hung at the front, Veterans Outreach Program, rebuilding lives one step at a time. Mark found a seat in the back, blending into the crowd. A man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and a confident stance took the microphone. "Good morning," the man began. "My name is Captain Harris, retired Army, and I know why you're here, because I was where you are now, lost, without a purpose, wondering if life would ever make sense again." Mark's shoulders tensed. The words hit too close to home. "We're not here to pity you," Harris continued. "We're here to help you get back on your feet, because no one understands what you've been through better than the people in this room." The meeting went on, filled with testimonials from veterans who had turned their lives around. Mark listened intently, but remained skeptical. After the session, Paul found him near the coffee table. "Glad you came," Paul said with a grin. "Not sure if this is for me," Mark admitted. "Fair enough," Paul said, unfazed. "But just hear me out. There's a workshop tomorrow. Job placements, housing assistance, the real deal. You've got nothing to lose." Mark hesitated. "I'll think about it." The next day, curiosity won out. Mark returned for the workshop, where he met counselors who didn't just offer generic advice, but tailored solutions for veterans like him. By the end of the day, Mark had a lead on a maintenance job at a local factory and a place to stay at a transitional housing program. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a start. Weeks turned into months, and Mark threw himself into rebuilding his life. He woke up early, showed up for work on time, and began saving whatever he could. The weight on his chest gradually lifted, replaced by a renewed sense of purpose. One afternoon, as Mark walked past the community park, he spotted a young boy struggling to carry a large box of canned goods. Without thinking, Mark rushed to help. "Thanks, mister," the boy said breathlessly. "No problem," Mark replied with a smile. As he set the box down near a donation table, a volunteer approached. It was Paul. "Mark!" Paul beamed. "Didn't expect to see you here." Mark shrugged. "Figured it was time to give back. Besides, you were right. This place helped me when I needed it most." Paul clapped him on the back. "Proud of you, brother." Looking around at the bustling scene, the volunteers, the families receiving help, Mark felt a warmth he hadn't known in years. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't just surviving. He was living with purpose again. Months turned into a year, and Mark's life had transformed in ways he never thought possible. The maintenance job at the factory had turned into a full-time position, and his dedication earned him respect from both his co-workers and supervisors. With steady paychecks, he was able to move into a modest but comfortable apartment. But it wasn't just the roof over his head that marked the change. It was the man he was becoming. The weight of his past no longer defined him. He had found stability and, more importantly, a reason to keep going. Mark continued volunteering at the community center, helping organize food drives and mentoring other veterans who were struggling to find their footing. His story became a source of hope for those who had lost their way, just as he once had. One sunny afternoon, Mark stood beside Paul, who was now a close friend, overseeing a line of donations being sorted. "Feels good, doesn't it?" Paul asked, wiping sweat from his brow. Mark smiled, looking around at the bustling scene. "Yeah, it does. Never thought I'd be back on my feet, let alone helping others." Paul nodded. Sometimes life knocks us down, so we can rise stronger. Later that evening, as Mark walked home, he passed the same bench where his journey had taken a turn that cold November day. He paused, the memory of his darkest moments lingering for just a second before fading away. He no longer carried the weight of those days. Instead, he carried gratitude for the people who had believed in him when he couldn't believe in himself, for the second chances that life had given him, and for the strength he'd found within. Mark knew one thing for certain. He was living proof that no matter how far someone falls, there's always a way back up. Mark's story teaches us that no matter how far life knocks you down, there's always a way back up. Sometimes, all it takes is the courage to accept help and the determination to rebuild. And when you find your strength again, helping others becomes your greatest purpose. If Mark's journey inspired you, remember to like, share, and subscribe to the Brotherhood Tales. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss a story that moves you. And remember, there's always hope, even in the toughest times.